Golden Shovel Agency, Keller Inc., LS Electric, Springstead Incorporated, UW-Madison Office of Corporate Relations, Beerbrecher and Associates, and Wisconsin Business Development Finance Corporation. The other corporate sponsor and conference sponsor is also the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions, and here to introduce our speaker is Secretary Lori Keita-Hyman. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. It's an honor to be here. You know, I want to say that I think it's great that WEDA partnered to put on this Bold Wisconsin report. It's great to have studies of other models that are successful across the U.S., and certainly we've seen many of those models. Certainly it was great to hear about Indiana's model. And I wanted to make sure that you knew about a model that I have seen to be quite successful here in the Midwest, and it's called the Kansas Bioscience Authority. And DFI, our focus is on access to capital for businesses. We also are the banking and securities regulator of the state. But we really want to make sure that small businesses and entrepreneurial businesses can get access to the capital. So the Kansas Bioscience Authority is run by Tom Thornton. Tom, first and foremost, is a Badger, a University of Wisconsin alumni. But he's also got a great background in early stage investing and certainly in public policy, and now he runs the Kansas Bioscience Authority, which is an organization basically which is focused on growth in the bioscience industry in Kansas. And he'll talk a little bit about how the model works, but the one thing that I thought I'd say, me being from a small town called Thornton, from outstate, from Oshkosh, is that the model that he's going to talk about today, I think, is one that can be implemented by industries and in the clusters that we can grow here in Wisconsin. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom Thornton, President of Kansas Bioscience Authority.
Well, thank you, Lori. There's probably a lot of good reasons to be here. The weather, of course, Chamber of Commerce weekend, I hope. Lori's been kind enough to arrange some meetings tomorrow to learn more about some of the technology-based economic development initiatives around the state. I'm actually going to make the homecoming game. Hope the Badgers beat the Gophers. But the real reason I'm here is Lori. Her passion, particularly as it relates to access to capital, certainly has worn off on us, and we've learned a lot together. I think what I'm going to dig into here is, yes, I'm going to explain the Kansas Bioscience Authority, but really I'm going to dig into hopefully some real tactical stuff to give you an appreciation of how the KBA works, and maybe leave it to you to decide whether or not this is a relevant model for Wisconsin. I firmly believe that this model is extendable into other regions, other states. I've been doing this technology-based economic development work for about 20 years or so in a private sector context, running a venture fund, merger and acquisitions work after that. Ran the equivalent to the KBA in Illinois for many years, and of course now at the authority. I'm going to dig into a few relevant points related to the authority that I think are somewhat unique. Our funding mechanism. There's all sorts of innovation in the world, the kinds of entrepreneurs that we support, of course, innovation from a research perspective, but there's also something that we describe as policy innovation. And I think at the core of the KBA, and what allows us to do many of the things that we do is a very unique funding mechanism that, at least to my knowledge, has not been replicated in any other state in the country. I'll talk certainly about our investment strategy. We view ourselves as a fund. We're a key part of the state's economic development strategy, a very big and important tool, but at the end of the day, we view ourselves as a fund that expects a return on every investment we make, and I'll talk more about not only that approach, but our investment thesis, and then give you an example of some of the investments we make. In terms of the overview, context matters a great deal here. Kansas principally has three major legs to its economy: energy, agriculture, and aviation manufacturing. Many years ago, those in the Kansas legislature took, I think, a pretty bold step and said we need to start thinking about expanding and diversifying our economy in many respects, and hit on some rather important and key strengths that the state had, both in terms of research and industrial clustering in the biosciences. The KBA was created under the Kansas Economic Growth Act. I won't go into every single element of the act, but the formation of the KBA is its principal outcome. Motivating factors here, I think, are probably manifold. My guess is every state in the union probably has these same motivating factors. I won't go through every single one of them. But I think there was this persistent, nagging question that we've got this research base, we've got this massive clustering of bioscience companies, and the state is doing nothing to support it. And in fact, if we don't do something to support it, it likely will go elsewhere in terms of potential growth, or likely potential growth will be deferred in many respects. We'll never get to that point of diversification. KBA is a $581 million fund. I'll get into the fund in a second. But we invest, like a fund does, in asset classes. So asset class number one for us is research. You're not going to grow a bioscience enterprise anywhere, regionally, nationally, without an exceptionally strong and vibrant research infrastructure, and I will hit that theme pretty hard as we go along. We don't fund research for research's sake. Big goal of ours is to make sure that we're translating that research from the bench to smaller and more mature companies. So fostering the formation and growth of bioscience companies is very important to us. The third is probably a more traditional economic development role. My guess is everyone in the room here is familiar with this one, but facilitating the expansion and attraction of bioscience companies and the financing that goes with that certainly is a very important part of our mission. You know, we have an aspirational mission. It is to position our state as a national and even international leader in the biosciences. And, you know, as I dig into this more, I wouldn't be surprised to learn there's some people around the room here scratching your heads. But I'll show you some data about the extraordinary progress we've made in a relatively short period of time. We exist outside the appropriations process. Again, I'll get into this more as I talk about our funding mechanism. But the funding mechanism certainly allows us to do some very, very innovative things. I think everyone here likes to describe the culture that you and your team and your organizations wake up to every morning and really get you going. Ours really is to position the biosciences as a peer to our state's heritage, again, in agriculture, energy, and in manufacturing. And that's a very big goal for us. You know, as we also talk about culture, you should get a sense of what we're trying to accomplish. What does the end state look like? And this slide is intended to depict several things. One, where were we when the KBA was formed? Where are we now? And what are some of the big long-term goals for our organization? Again, research, very, very important element here. Relatively small bioscience research infrastructure in 2004. But you will see it has experienced some fairly dramatic growth in a relatively short period of time. I won't go through the first hash mark there. The second one I think we're pretty proud of. The state of Kansas, not California, not Massachusetts, ranks number one in the percentage growth of National Institutes of Health financing. NIH is the single largest funder of bioscience research in the country, certainly from their federal perspective, but from 2004 to 2009, Kansas has experienced a pretty dynamic growth there. Venture investment, it was zero in 2004, just zero. You know, I think I would go so far as to say we're a flyover zone. I mean, literally, you know, the place you fly over on the way to do deals on the coast. A big goal here, of course, is to take it to a point of sustainable annual venture investment of $200 million. And right now we're around $60 million. So a pretty big jump in a relatively short period of time. Of course, jobs, a number of companies, fairly substantial growth there. I think we're particularly proud of the growth there in terms of the context of the economic conditions and environment that our state certainly is facing, and I know other states are as well. So, you know, this is what end state looks like for us, and this is where we are in terms of progress. I toss out metrics relatively quickly before I get into the real meat of it, but we've been around since 2004. The KBA first got started in terms of investing in 2006. You'll understand why it took 2 years in a second. But in terms of outcomes, there have been some pretty substantial ones. Jobs, of course, Pretty healthy number there. I think the one we're most proud of is that for every dollar we've invested to date, we've yielded a return of over $9, and I'll get into just what that looks like here in a second.